Hi guys, how are you doing? Today I'm going to talk about a very important topic in Python, and this topic is about context managers. So you may have seen this pattern before in Python where you open like a file using the with keyword. So the with keyword here creates what is called the context manager in Python. And what are these context managers? So this is the topic that I want to dive into today. To discuss what context managers are, how to create your own context managers, and why context managers are important. So let's begin with this example, like a common example that we see often, that is opening a file using a with. So you create a context manager. So here, as you can see, you have like a function that you pass in the file that you want to open, and you call that as f, and then you did some lines from there. So right here where there is with, you enter the context manager. So as you open this file, so you are now within the context of this open file. So within this context, you can access what f is and what f contains. And so here within this context manager, we read what are the lines in f, and we save them in lines. And outside this context manager, we can access this variable that we created, which is lines. So how that works is whenever you open resources in any programming language, not just Python, you have to close those resources when you're done. So for example, when you open a file is like a resource that you're using in a program. When you finish using this resource, you have to close it. So for example, you could say you could open this file like this. So this opens the file, and you could read from this file just the same way we read from this file. However, when you finish reading from this file, you have to close it. So you have to close the resource. So usually, if you don't use context managers, you have to remember to close the file when you finish reading it. It's not advised to leave some resources open when you're done using them. So you always have to remember to close it. But now when you're using a context manager, immediately you leave this context right here when you reach print, or when you just reach here, this file will automatically be closed for you by this context manager. So that's why it's called the manager, because it's managing your resources for you. Immediately you finish using those resources, it closes the resource for you, so you don't have to worry about that. And this will happen whether there's an error within the code or not. It's going to automatically close the resource for you. So this is very important even when you're accessing, for example, the database. You create a connection to your database and you need some information from the database. When you finish accessing those resources, you need to close that connection that you had established with the database. And sometimes you might forget to close that resource. Therefore, it's advised that you always use a context manager, because it's guaranteed that that resource will be closed at the end of the context manager. Whether you forget or not, whether there's an error or not, that resource will be closed. Now, if you're doing this by yourself, maybe between, let me say here you have something else, some code, and it throws an error. Before you run this, for example, if you are looking at a file here, I'm using a notebook. If you're looking at a file, this will cause an error and this won't run. So you won't be able to close the file. But here, even if you have an error somewhere here, this file will automatically be closed by this context manager for opening files. Let's see how we can create our own context manager for files. So there are two methods that we can use. So the first one that we're going to look at is using classes, but you can also do functional context manager. For example, what we have here is a function, so we can also do that. And I prefer using functional context managers because there's less boilerplate. So let's see how we can create a class context manager for opening files. So we create a file. Let's say we'll call it file manager, and we define init, and here we have self, and we need the file name. So I'll just call it that. So self.filename is the file name. And so we receive the file name here. So when someone opens the file, we receive the file name. And the two methods that we need to define are enter. So these are mandatory. What should we do when someone enters this file? So we can say f open self.f name. So we return this f, and the final thing that we need to define is exit. So we'll receive any quags that someone, and here the only thing that we do is just close this file. So here we just need to close this on exit. So now we've created our own context manager, so we can put some information. Let's print something here just to see what happens. Print, and here we also print. So now let's use our file manager. So we'll say with file manager, we pass the name of the file, poetry.txt is f. Let's lead now these lines goes to line 4, line in f. Here we've created the context manager, so we need two methods in this context manager. So we have this enter and also the exit. So these are mandatory, they have to be defined within any context manager. But you can also have an init. Method. So here we just receive the name of the file, and then we open this file, and then we're able to read from this file. So we can print what's in these lines. You see that it works exactly as this other context manager, like the original context manager. So you see, as soon as you enter, it prints here that you've entered, and on exit it prints that there's a exit here. So even if we have, for example, we cause an error by dividing by 0, you'll see that the exit will still run. So you see it's printed that it has exited, and we have that exit, but we still have an error, which is that error division by 0. So whether there's an error or not, so even if I move it up here, you see it to enter and it will do exit. So whatever happens within the file, it's going to close. So when on exit runs, it's closing this file that we created. So it will always close this file. It will never be open. So this is one good advantage of using our context managers, is that we can manage our resources. It's guaranteed that the resource will be closed, and this guarantee is very important. So let me remove these errors that we caused here on purpose. So you see to run, it's entered and exit. So, and we can see what we've read from these lines, which is that. So one mistake that people usually make is not creating an instance. Instead of passing in something or creating an instance, you just say with your context manager's f. So this will cause an error because this is a class and you need to initialize this class. You need to create an instance of this class. So you create it using these brackets. And here, because we expect some file name here, so that's why we pass that file name there. And yes, so that's how it works. So now let's move on to functional context managers. So we'll move to functional context managers now. So the first thing that you need to use functional context managers is that you need to import a decorator from contextlib. So from contextlib, import context manager. So from contextlib, import context manager, and this context manager, you have to use it as a decorator for your function. So here I'm going to use it here. So we define our function. This is a decorator. So def file manager. I'll use lowercase letters, and this gets a file name. So the first thing that we need to do is that we'll have some lines of code, to initialize our function. So we can say f is equals to open. So here we'll open the file, and we have to yield this file, and then after the yield we have to close this function. So what's happening here is that everything before the yield is like what we define in the enter when you're using when you're using class context managers. So it's this part that you have here on top. So this is like before yield, and then after yield you have to now close your resources, or the resources that you have. So here let me just print entering, and after I'll print closing. So this is very important for functional context manager. Every functional context manager has to have the yield keyword. So if you're not doing anything, like you don't need to return anything, you could just say yield. But here we need to return the function, so that we need to return this file handle so that it can be used. Let's see how we can use the same. So I'll just say so I pass in the name poetry.txt. So when I run this, you see that entering here has been printed, and then now we open this file which we assign to f, the file handle, and we return this f using yield. So you can't replace yield with return, it won't work. You have to use the yield keyword. And when we finish reading from this file, like at the end of the context manager, these lines which are below the yield will run. So let me show you what we have in lines. So I'll just print the first line. So you see that we have Romeo and Juliet there. So as you can see, using the functional context manager, you have less boilerplate. It's just straight to the point, only that you need to use a decorator which you import from contextlib. The class context manager has a lot of boilerplate, but when you come to the functional, we don't have a lot of boilerplate code. Is straight. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed already.